Follow the geopolitical change. Again, we've been saying this over and over again. It's getting more and more complicated. We're looking at this ongoing political and also this economic competition between US and China. And particularly, we're looking at this political competition between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. It doesn't look like either side is willing to barge at this moment. But on the other hand, people are still questioning the resilience of democracy. What is the concept of democracy today? And some experts believe the US today is trying, not uniting the world, but instead is isolating the US away from the rest of the countries, rest of the world. How do we understand that? And what about the presence of populism? Again, if you follow our show, we've been talking about the threat of authoritarianism and also the existence of political polarization and plus the political populism. Putting everything together, what is the direction for the US at this moment? Is it unification with the world or is it total isolation? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who is the Professor Kurt Weyland. Professor Weyland is the Professor of Government and Mike Hogg Professor in the Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. He holds a Ph.D. in Political Science from Stanford and has conducted extensive field research in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, and many other countries. And his work has drawn considerable inspiration from cognitive psychological insights and has increasingly combined political science with a historical analysis. And he's the author of the amazing book called Democracy's Resilience to Populism's Threat. Well, Professor Weyland, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Well, Professor Weyland, as we mentioned before, some experts believe that U.S. today, it's not looking for ways to engage with the friends, with allies, but instead is trying to isolate itself away from the world. Of course, when we say isolation, we're not looking at isolation as North Korea, Russia, but it's a political isolation. And especially someone says, and I believe that President Trump has always been uncomfortable with the give and take of aligned politics. I want to start with a question. Your thoughts. Where is the direction of U.S. today? And why do you think today, for the second term of President Trump, continuing we're seeing this political ambition and also this political isolation? Your thoughts.
So this is a very big and important question. And the way I look at it is the following, that the United States from the Second World War on was clearly number one in the world, even in its Cold War with the Soviet Union, especially after the breakdown of communism, for 20, 30 years, the US was number one. And what the United States has faced since the disastrous invasions in Iraq, the Afghanistan war, the Great Recession of 2008, is a certain process of decline. And what has happened at the same time is, of course, the rise of China. And so suddenly the United States is not clearly number one in the world anymore. I heard a statistic that in number of areas of like science and research where the United States used to be number one in innovation and creativity, now China is actually ahead. So I think that is the background for President Trump to be skeptical whether alliances that the United States has had have been sufficiently beneficial to the US and whether alliance partners have been doing free riding on the US. And I'm a European. I mean, you hear my German accent. And I think it is very clear that a lot of European countries didn't want to spend that much on defense because there was the big brother US who would take care of it. And so the United States provided extra security for European countries. And so what I'm saying is this, I think President Trump, to a certain extent, has a point in trying to, make sure that this free riding doesn't happen. The bigger point is that President Trump seeing this decline, is trying to put America first and in some sense restore the preeminence and predominance of the United States. Now, of course, not in a systematic way that a traditional realist would do, right? I mean, in some sense, the underlying analysis is very realist about power and power relations and seeing how the power distribution in the global system is shifting and trying to boost the power of its own countries. So the basic analysis is very realist and in economics mercantilistic. This whole thing about, tariffs, manufacturing, increasing benefits for one's own country. But of course, the way President Trump does it is not in the systematic, realist way, but in the crazy, chaotic, haphazard way of a populist, which means that partly the style, this kind of bullying, blackmailing style, if you don't fall in line, I'm going to impose huge tariffs on you and I won't defend you. It's not, so there is a lot of broken china along the way. He's like the bull in the china shop. He has a certain point, and there is an analysis behind that one can see where he comes from, but the way that he's pursuing it creates a whole bunch of unnecessary damage. And so I think that's what you are seeing, this America first, this, we have been taken advantage for way too long and we need to reassert ourselves using, if you wish, brutally the power of the US to achieve these kinds of goals. And so as scholars, we have to be fair and balanced. As I say, we can kind of see where he comes from, and there is a point, there's a certain justification of what he's trying to do, but the way he's doing it is highly problematic, and the typical populist focus on the short run. I got Japan to promise to invest billions of dollars in the US. The potential damage, which is that this blackmailing, bullying really doesn't go over well across the world, among the friends, among the allies, among the adversaries, the problems that this will cause. I mean, I'm sure these foreign leaders who have to sign these trade deals, as soon as the door is closed, they probably curse the man as nobody could imagine. And so that kind of damage in trust, reputation, the image of the US. I mean, the image of the US globally is going down like this. Now, a real realist who is about power doesn't care that much about that, but I think that is something that the United States has always used to good effect, the soft power, the image of the US, the favorable reputation, and there's a lot of damage done on that. But as I say, we need to be fair and balanced and see the various sides of this Trumpian approach.
Well, of course, Professor Weyland, I agree with you 100%. But if we look at the presidency of Donald Trump, again, from the first term until the present days, there's no surprise that he is the believer of tariff. And he constantly uses tariffs, as you mentioned before, to get into his ways. But second, Trump also believes the word loyalty, or in other words, that it's really fallen into his personal friendships or personal dedication to his policy or the way that he does or manage the politics or finance. But let's talk about a couple characters. For example, the Hungarian president Viktor Orban, and then Trump once he praised as a great leader. And before the fallout with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and he once said was a smarter guy. Or even today, look at the relationship with Vladimir Putin, and despite the betrayal of Putin on the war of Ukraine. So Professor Weyland, again, from your perspective, how do we assess the temperature of Donald Trump's rhetoric towards Orban, towards Kim Jong-un, towards Putin? And we know that some of the characters are now welcomed or now celebrated by the international community. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to get it or doesn't seem to buy it until that moment, like Putin on the war of Ukraine, start to realize, hey, listen, Trump, I'm not playing your game. I'm not playing your card. I'm doing my own things. So I want to know your thoughts. Why do you think Trump continue to use such rhetoric to engage with the characters, and also, I guess, surprised by their misbehaviors or unexpected, what we call the actions or political motives? Your thoughts?
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, what you say is the following. The way I define populism is personalistic plebiscitarian leadership. Plebiscitarian meaning reach out to the masses, but personalistic, a very important core characteristic. And Donald Trump is like the epitome of this personalism. Everything is personal. There is no, he looks into Putin's eyes and he thinks he can trust the guy. But then there is a falling out and he threatens him with sanctions. He is best friends with the fellow from North Korea, and then they have a falling out. So this is very, very personalistic, almost like childish, almost like in the playground. He hurt me, now I'm not his friend anymore. So when you mention loyalty, for Donald Trump, loyalty is predominantly a one-way street, loyalty to him. Donald Trump has shown very little loyalty to anybody else. He saw it in the first government. As soon as somebody ran afoul of him in his government, he threw them out, excoriated them, humiliated them, attacked them. Loyalty, not like this person did something for me, I might have to part ways, but we are loyal. So it's very, I'm not a psychologist, but a psychologist would probably say this is like the personal behavior of an 8-year-old in the playground. Very much based on personal preferences and likes and personal whims. As you said, Donald Trump has been or claimed to be friends with a lot of bad guys. He doesn't care. It's completely personalistic. What other people think about it, if he thinks this person is trustworthy or this person is a friend, it's so there you see just the hypertrophy of his populism. Just whatever I want to do, whoever I want to be friends with, whoever I want to break with, I'll just do it, and I don't care.
And of course, again, as we mentioned before, the world is very much surprised by the politics and this economic policy that Donald Trump carried out. Again, it's not just about placing tariffs upon the countries. As you mentioned before, Professor Weyland, it's about royalty, but to Donald Trump himself. So in other words, this is the game I set up, and this is the game and the rules that I need to create, and so the world can follow. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. Now, let's talk about this. We've seen that throughout the war in Ukraine, and also we've seen right now the ongoing tension between Israel and Iran. Around the world, some experts believe that President Trump is very much impatient sometimes, or even perhaps most of the time, very much impatient with the existing allies or existing friends. So he started to offer many alternatives and beyond some of the practicality of the politics or beyond the feasibility of the policies. So, Professor, from your perspective, again, you study populism and you understand the threat of populism. So why do you think that today that Donald Trump seemed to be running out of patience with some of the strategies? Again, you think about the first administration, he had a lot of generals and he had a lot of consultants, from the military. But the second term, it's a total shakeup. And we don't see a lot of generals in the administrations, and we don't see a lot of experts in the administrations, especially when we talk about military strategies. So is he running out of patience with some of the conventional method, but instead he's trying to create new methods, or he's trying to create new ways to delegate the domestic or international politics. What do you think of that?
The way I see it is the following. When Donald Trump won the election in 2016 and became president, I think the person most surprised about that was Donald Trump himself. I don't think he had an idea, that he would be president. And I think he was completely unprepared. And at that point in time, still showing a certain modesty or minimal amount of humility. He surrounded himself by experts because he knew he was an outsider, a newcomer, didn't understand Washington, didn't understand the world. So he tried to rely on some members of the so-called establishment. And what he, from his perspective, during his first government, learned that these people could block what he wanted, could undermine what he sometimes wanted, and were not as 150% loyal as the typical personalistic populist leader would have liked. So then Donald Trump makes a comeback that is utterly unexpected. I mean, Donald Trump was considered politically dead after January 6, 2021. Donald Trump, with all his indictments, was considered politically dead. Why? Donald Trump almost got assassinated. So when Donald Trump makes a comeback and wins, I think he literally has a sense that he is predestined by Providence to be a uniquely important leader, and that therefore he can do whatever he wants because he has pulled off all these amazing feats, and only somebody who's utterly extraordinary can get that way. And therefore, in his second government, he's in some sense, if you wish, even much more self-confident than he was in his first government. And he doesn't want to have experts anymore who tell him, oh, you can't do this, and oh, you can't do that, and oh, you need to do that. He doesn't want to have people with any kind of independent power base anymore, who can oppose him, who can deny him things, who can just slow walk things. He wants complete loyalists, especially in his inner circle. And so you can see that in the appointments that he has made to these top positions. I mean, none of these people, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, none of these people have any qualification that anybody halfway serious would recognize. The only thing that distinguishes them is utter loyalty to Donald Trump. And so, in some sense, his first government was populism, and this is like populism squared in some sense. This is like, a different order of magnitude of populism. This is completely unconstrained populism. And I think that's why you get these phenomena.
Well, Professor Weyland, I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about one of the crucial countries in Latin American region, which is Brazil. And recently on social media, I know, Professor Weyland, you're the expert. You did a lot of research on that. Recently, based on the social media post, that we've seen this economic tension between U.S. and Brazil. And of course, the current leader of Brazil, Lula, is also an unconventional leader and as an unconventional character. So in other words, correct me if I'm wrong, he doesn't buy into the economic rhetoric that Donald Trump carry out. So from your perspective, someone like Lula that responded strongly towards Donald Trump's tariff a war, or responded very negatively towards Donald Trump, how do we understand that? So in other words, how much does it impact Lula's politics in Brazil as we see Donald Trump continue to pay attention to the Latin American region? Does it work? Or maybe it's time for Trump to realize, hey, Lula is different, and maybe I need to change the tone of voice, or maybe I need to change this economic policy towards a country like Brazil. What do you think?
So this is interesting because the root of the conflict is not economics. The root of the conflict is political, and there you have one of the few cases. You asked me 8 minutes ago about loyalty. There you have one of the few cases where Donald Trump shows some lasting loyalty towards another right-wing populist leader, and that's Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, who, like Trump, lost re-election and was defeated by Lula. and who faces serious judicial issues, who is about to be put in prison because after his electoral defeat, every indication suggests he prepared what people call a self-coup, using the military to just perpetuate himself in power, disregard the election result, or undermine, overthrow democracy. So Bolsonaro is in serious trouble. And Donald Trump is using the threat of massive tariffs on Brazil, which is an emerging economy, in order to bail out his friend Bolsonaro. So there you have one of the rare cases where Donald Trump actually shows loyalty towards somebody else. The reason is that Bolsonaro has 3 sons, and one of them is constantly talking to Trump and influencing and lobbying and pushing for his father and whatever. That is the source of the issue. So this is not an economic issue. I mean, what Donald Trump is blackmailing Brazil is to let Bolsonaro off the hook, which is a completely, I don't know how to say that, strange demand, because it's not the government that decides that, it is the courts. And so Donald Trump is trying to use the threat of massive tariffs on the country he must assume that the government can just push the court to do what Donald Trump wants. And now, so that is the underlying issue of the conflict. Now, where does Lula come from? Lula defeated Bolsonaro in 2022, and everybody was relieved, or not everybody, but many people were relieved that gave Brazilian democracy a new lease on life. Lula is an experienced leader who has his own faults, but he faces a very difficult situation, because whereas Bolsonaro lost the presidency, many right-wingers and Bolsonaro supporters were elected to Congress. And so Lula, the left-winger, faces a Congress that is like 60, 65, 70% right-wing, and therefore Lula isn't getting very much done. So Lula's popularity is trending downward, and Lula, like many leaders, would like to be re-elected one more time in 2026. So here his popularity is going downward. He faces the outrageous blackmail of Donald Trump. So you put 2 and 2 together. What does Lula do? Lula says, Trump, leave me alone. We are not giving in. We are not easily blackmailed. And what happens? His popularity is going up. I think that is the background of that conflict. And so Lula, is trying to, if you wish, in some sense, invoking Brazilian nationalism, national autonomy. We are not ceding to blackmail. But Brazil sees itself as a rising middle power, as the rising leader of South America. Brazil has aspirations for, if you wish, great power status. And a country like that does not easily want to give in to the, as I say, outrageous threat of a bully, because this is not an easy demand to accommodate. It would completely break the rule of law in Brazil. It would make a big dent in Brazilian democracy. So Lula, in that sense, stands on pretty firm ground, but he also has a political self-interest to use the bad guy Donald Trump to be the one who defends Brazil and defends Brazilian sovereignty. Now, I don't think that Donald Trump is very impressed by Brazil and doesn't care all that much about Brazil specifically. Donald Trump is not going to change his approach because Lula da Silva is trying to not give in. And of course, economic realities and economic necessities in Brazil might somehow or other lead to some kind of negotiation. So I don't think this will be like a huge battle that will continue. I think Brazil would have a hard time sustaining that, but I think that is the background of that specific conflict.
Professor Weyland, I want to end our conversation bringing another country. I mean, again, you're mentioning the sustainability of the politics. I want to talk about the nation of Argentina. Again, based on the latest research or based on the latest news, that the U.S. government is working closely with the Argentinian government regarding to create this visa-free program. So in other words, more Argentinians are able to travel to the U.S. without the visa. Now, it's not about the visa program. It's about the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Milei at this moment. So we just talk about someone like Lula, but let's shift our gear to Milei. So Professor Weyland, from your perspective, is Milei getting rewarded by playing the card close to Trump or paying royalty to Trump? Because we've seen on the stage that Milei visited Donald Trump, or Milei campaigned for Donald Trump, or so we're building this air quote alliance for Trump. So from your perspective, what do we say, or what do you say about Milei and Trump, or U.S. and Argentina at this moment? Is it really mutual benefits, or they're trying to use each other to increase the popularity of the characters? Your final thoughts.
Right. No, I think definitely. And I mean, I think this is much more important for Milei. I think in the United States, especially Donald Trump's base doesn't care about Argentina. They're probably, the deplorables of the Trump base don't even know where Argentina is. But for Milei, because Milei is a complete outsider. Milei has stabilized the Argentine economy much better than people had, including myself, had expected. But the economy is still in pretty difficult conditions, and Milei has midterm elections coming up. And so he wants to have kind of a little, other feather in his cap, like, oh my God, I got visa-free entry to the US for Argentines. And that is, from the US perspective, a very small concession for the US, but Milei can, of course, see what my right-wing populist friendship with Donald Trump brings to Argentines. I think that's what's behind that. But I think that is a comparatively minor issue. Milei is trying to... You've had in recent years this sort of effort to do an international alliance of right-wing populist leaders. So Milei just held a huge meeting, the most right-wingers in the world came together. I think it was in the Argentine city of Córdoba or somewhere, gave a big speech. I'm the most anti-left person in the world. So, there is a lot of performativity in these things. People want to be in the news. Populist leaders, it's show, it's theater, it's discourse, it's rhetoric, it's the big words, big mouth people. And so I think that's what you have with Milei. And so for him, to show my special relationship with Donald Trump gave Argentines this easier access to the US, because many Argentines, love shopping in the US and love visiting the US. And so he can kind of say, look at me. So in the run up to midterms, that is kind of an additional little boost, whoa, I'm somebody on the international scene.
Well, again, Professor Weyland, we don't really understand the games that Donald Trump's play, and surely the whole world anticipates more surprises from Trump administration. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Professor Kurt Weyland. Again, Professor Weyland is a professor of government and Mike Hogg professor in liberal arts at the University of Texas at Austin, and his research covers countries in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Peru, and many more. And I strongly encourage everyone to go online to check out his amazing book, Democracy's Resilience to Populism's Threat. Well, Professor Weyland, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay attention to the global affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.